Hey, so in case you missed it, last week we announced that we have a new feature in our Elevate Church app. Now, if you don't have our Elevate Church app, you can scan this flow code. It'll take you to the Apple or the Android, Google store, and you can download our app. And the new feature to look out for is message notes, where very simply, every single week, we're publishing just a condensed key points, key scriptures, big ideas for the message of that week. And we're already getting great feedback from people, just finding it such a useful tool to review after the message or during the week. Like, oh, what was that they talked about? What was the point? Oh, what was the scripture? And super helpful. So it's there. Grab the app, check out the message notes feature, including you'll see the message notes for today's message. Now, here's a question. Have you ever started something and got off to a solid start and then ultimately didn't finish? Now, there's the classic one, getting healthy, like whether it's a New Year's resolution or, whatever it happens to be. And of course, you do all the things you do at the start. You clear out the pantry and restock it with all the healthy foods. Maybe you buy the treadmill or you join the gym or you get the bicycle or whatever it is, and you get started. And then for whatever reason, whether it's weeks or months or maybe even best case scenario, a few years later, it's all a distant memory. Maybe it's getting your finances in order. And so you sit down and you create a plan and you look at how you can reduce your expenses. You maybe sell some stuff to build up an emergency fund to get started. And you're getting busy and you're seeing some things turn around. And, then the Black Friday sales come around and, well, who could resist a bargain? And you're kind of back where you started. Of course, the list goes on, but really, this is just a reminder that it is easier to start than it is to finish. And look, I've seen this in church over the years. I've seen countless people place their faith in Jesus and they start burning red hot. They're so excited. They're asking like, where should I start reading the Bible? And they're signing up for a team and they're joining an Elevate group and they're starting giving financially. And then, in too many cases, sadly, it doesn't last, when whether it's time pressures or distractions or, in some cases, it could be discouragement. I've seen person after person either fade out gradually or in some cases, flame out spectacularly. And then, that's kind of it. And what I want to focus on today and what's vital for us to understand is that when it comes to following Jesus, how we finish is at least as important and maybe even more important than how we start. So I just want to focus on a couple of tools today that you and I can use to help us finish well. All right, now, while you're in the scanning mode, how about you scan this flow code? And this is going to take you to the Bible app. It's going to take you to Acts chapter 20. Now, this thing of Acts is a historical account, kind of the highlight reel of the early church. It was recorded by a doctor named Luke. It's kind of the sequel to his biographical account of Jesus' life and ministry. And we've been looking through the second half of this, some of the highlights in a series we've called God is on the Move. And one of the key characters that dominates the second half of the book of Acts is a guy named Paul. And in particular, it's dominated by his three missionary journeys. Now, last week, we looked at some of the highlights and, dare I say, lowlights of his first missionary journey. And you can go back and watch that message or jump on your podcast or on our Elevate Church app, and you can listen to the audio version of that. That was his first missionary journey. Today, I want to drop us into his third and final missionary journey, where Paul's ultimately heading back to Jerusalem. God's Holy Spirit had revealed to him that he was going to suffer, he was going to be imprisoned, and really had revealed to Paul that his time on earth was drawing to a close. And so Paul was sailing back to Jerusalem, and he was stopping at various towns and various cities along the way, places where a church had been formed from nothing, and he was stopping in there, different places, staying with them a few days and so on, teaching, encouraging, all those things. But very interestingly, he bypassed Ephesus. Now, Ephesus was like, it's in what is now called Turkey, was like a very, very, very strategic port city in that part of the world at the time known as Asia Minor. Paul had previously gone there and in his first missionary journey, and he showed up in Ephesus as the first and only Jesus follower. And he ultimately launched the church there. He ultimately stayed there for 3 years to discover and develop and deploy leaders. But he bypassed, on his way back to Jerusalem, he bypassed Ephesus. And I'm going to come back to that as to why that probably was the case. But anyway, he arrived in another place called Miletus, which is still in Turkey, and he summoned the church leaders from Ephesus to come and meet him, rather than him stopping in at Ephesus to meet them. Again, I'll come to that in a minute. And when he gathered they arrived, and when he gathered them, he just gave them some incredible instruction. Like, this is like on top of everything he'd already done to launch that church and develop leaders and so on. So anyway, when they arrived, the church leaders from Ephesus, Paul declared, you know that from the day I set foot in the province of Asia until now, I've done the Lord's work humbly and with many tears. I have endured the trials that came to me from the plots of the Jews. Now, right there, those 3 words, I have endured, we learn that Paul lived courageously, that not only did it take courage to set foot as the first and only Jesus follower in Ephesus, ultimately to exercise faith and a pioneering spirit to launch the church there, it came at a cost. It was difficult for him a lot of the time, and he highlights this, what I'm going to say is one of 2 things I'm going to talk about today, the importance of living courageously, that we will not finish well following Jesus if we don't learn to live courageously, if we don't learn and develop the ability to endure trials and tough times. Because here's the reality, trials are inevitable, even for Jesus followers. And we talked about this in week 1 of this series, this idea that God moves in challenges, that God often uses great disruption or the hardest times to do great things. Now, I'm aware that you can find somebody or several bodies with YouTube channels, and they're going to tell you, if you become a Jesus follower, it's all about, I'm blessed, not stressed. Everything's rainbows and unicorns. And look, that might be a great way to grow a YouTube channel because it sounds like something everyone would want, blessed, not stressed. You're suddenly immune from challenges of life. But there's 2 problems with that. Number 1, it's simply not true. Choose to follow Jesus and never face challenges and trials and hardships. Not true. Secondly, and this just seems a little bit counterintuitive, but actually, by trying to avoid challenges or thinking that it's better to live completely trial-free, challenge-free, actually means that you'll miss out on some of life's greatest growth opportunities. Because in my own experience and my own observation, I've learned that you grow more in the valleys than you do on the mountaintops. Like the mountaintops tend to be something that you can arrive at after you've endured and gone through the valleys if you don't quit. And Paul, having bypassed Ephesus and sent for the Ephesian church leaders to come and meet him in Miletus, he hinted at something that he went through during his time in Ephesus and the surrounding areas, where, as I mentioned earlier, he was there for 3 years. And scholars have tried to kind of piece this together, like why did he avoid going to Ephesus and instead he summoned the Ephesian church leaders to come and meet him? And one of many church scholars, including N.T. Wright, who I trust enormously, he's a New Testament scholar, theologian, he has cause to believe that while Paul was in Ephesus for the 3 years he was there, at some point in that time, he actually experienced a nervous breakdown. And it was so significant that he couldn't even bring himself to go back there. Now, if that's true, you could be like, well, what was the cause of that? Well, it could have been the time that we talked about last week that he was dragged out of the town of Lystra and stoned with not pebbles, but stones to the point where they actually thought he was killed. Could have been the incessant onslaught from Jewish zealots who continued to follow him around in those 3 years and show up and make life difficult for him and present legal challenges and accuse him of things. Could be the times he spent in a subhuman prison. Could have been the illnesses and the health issues he faced during that time. It could have been the burden and the responsibility of not having just planted and launched the church, but now this responsibility of growing it and developing leaders and trying to ensure that it's going to thrive when Paul moved on to the next thing. Or, most likely, a combination of all of the above. And while we don't know the specifics, Paul does actually allude to the fact that of what some of these enormous challenges looked like while he was in Ephesus, when he wrote his second letter to the church in Corinth. And this is what he wrote to them. We think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia. That's Turkey now. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure. And we thought we would never live through it. I mean, that's some serious hardship. In fact, we expected to die. But as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God who raises the dead. You know, Paul, he literally wrote, we were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure. In fact, we expected to die. There's a cliche that you may likely have heard probably more than once, and it floats around, raises its ugly head, and it goes like this: God will never give you more than you can handle. Are we reading the same Bible? Have those people read what Paul just wrote about his experience and his compatriots in Asia Minor? Hello? What's more accurate is to say that God will actually allow us to have times and circumstances and seasons where we very much will face things that are more than we can handle on our own, so that, as Paul went on to declare, we will have the opportunity to rely less in our own strength and learn to rely on God, who will give us the power, help us endure the trials, and ultimately finish well. And look, we when we're in these difficult situations and these trials and these hardships, one of the questions we can default to is, oh God, why is this happening to me? And look, that's not necessarily a bad question, but full disclosure, you may never find out why. There's just some things in life we don't get the answers to. Instead of just asking God, why is this happening to me? I would encourage you to be asking God, what are you showing me in this season? What can I learn in this season? How can I grow in and through this season so that I will come out better and stronger with greater faith and greater reliance on you, and ultimately go on to finish well? So number one, live courageously. Number two, guard yourself. Because there's things that come at you, people that come at you. We have a spiritual enemy who's constantly coming at you. And Paul uses this phrase, guard yourself. In fact, this is what he said to the leaders of the Ephesian church. Guard yourself and God's people. Like, guard yourself. Like, it's a military phrase. Feed and shepherd God's flock, his church purchased with his own blood, over which the Holy Spirit has appointed you as leaders. And look, I know that false teachers like vicious wolves will come in among you after I leave, not sparing the flock. This instruction to guard yourself and God's people, it very closely mirrors something that King Solomon wrote in his book of collected wisdom called the Book of Proverbs. He wrote this: guard your heart above all else. In other words, it's the most important thing. Not in the top 3, not in the top 10, no, number 1. And he said, why? Because it determines the course of your life. You want to project the course of your life, examine the condition of your heart, and it will literally reveal ahead of time where your life's going to end up. Now, heart damage really can come from two areas, or it come in two ways. It can come from the inside out, or it can come from the outside in. The inside out, one of the most prevalent and destructive ways that heart damage occurs from the inside out is bitterness and unforgiveness, which can grow, and it eats us alive from the inside out over time. We talked about this about a month ago in a message called Set Free to Forgive, which I would also encourage you to go back and watch or listen to on our podcast. And then there's stuff that attacks our heart and has the potential to cause damage from the outside in. What and who you allow to penetrate your heart. Who you let in is super important. Wise parents know this. Wise parents keep a close eye on who their kids are hanging around, because they know that the kids they're hanging around have a very powerful ability to affect their child positively or negatively. One of the things that we often fail to recognize is we never actually outgrow this. It's not like we arrive at our 25th birthday and all of a sudden, well, I'm no longer influenced by the people around me, because I'm 25 now. When I was a kid, sure, but now that I'm 25, no, you never outgrow this. So who you let into your life, who you let into your inner circle, who you let into your close sphere has the potential to positively or negatively affect your heart. So it matters. It matters who you let in. It also matters what you let in. Now it's 2025, and it seems that everyone has an opinion about everything, and they think that they need to share their opinion about everything. Well, here's the warning. 10 people might have an opinion on something in your life, but it would be unwise to give all 10 opinions equal weight. The wise move is to, if you listen to those 10 opinions, to weigh them up. Weigh them up using criteria like, how much do I trust this person? Have they actually built a platform of trust in my life? What's their level of maturity? And I mean spiritual maturity, but I also mean emotional maturity, relational maturity. Does this person have any experience in this area? Like, and I'm talking like, if you like, don't get your marriage advice from someone who's just signed the papers on their 6th divorce. You're like, yeah, they've had a lot of experience. No. Don't take your financial advice from someone who's broke all the time. No, take, marriage advice from somebody who's built a strong marriage, not necessarily a problem-free marriage, but ultimately a robust marriage. Take your financial advice from someone who's bearing the fruit of consistently applying God's wise principles of financial management over years. This is the sort of thing that by having some criteria and effectively some filters, it will help you guard your heart from forces from the outside in, and then I mentioned earlier, from the inside out. And so Paul, having lived courageously and having guarded his heart despite hardships that nearly took him out on multiple occasions, was able to write this bold declaration to the church in Corinth. We are pressed on every side by troubles, but we're not crushed. We're perplexed. We don't understand everything, but not driven to despair. We're hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. Through suffering, our bodies continue to share in the death of Jesus so that the life of Jesus may also be seen in our bodies. Friends, I said it right at the top. Let me say it again. When it comes to following Jesus, finishing well is at least as important, if not more important, than starting well. And my prayer is that you will learn to live courageously. You'll guard yourself and guard your heart so that you will continue the race, the journey that Jesus has called you to, and ultimately get to hear him say to you those incredible words, well done, good and faithful servant.